Something happened this week that nobody saw coming. And I don't mean that the way royal commentators always say it, as a hook, as a tease, as a way to get you to sit down for 15 minutes. I mean it literally. The people who cover this family for a living, the ones who have spent years mapping every silence and every side-eye between Harry and the palace, even they weren't ready for this. King Charles offered Harry his home. Not a hotel, not a quiet suggestion passed through an intermediary. A royal residence, his own, open. For Harry, for Meghan, for Archie, for Lilibet. And as of right now, there is no answer. Now, think about that for a second. Because we have spent 4 years watching a specific story play out. The story goes like this. Harry wants to come back. Harry reaches out. Harry extends the olive branch. And the palace, cold, formal, institutional, holds the line. The door is never quite open. The warmth is never quite real. The reconciliation is always almost happening, and then it isn't. That was the story. That was the pattern we all learned to read. And now it's been reversed. The father reached out first, publicly, unambiguously. He opened the door himself, and now his son is the one who hasn't walked through it. So the question that's sitting at the center of all of this isn't really, will Harry accept? That's the surface question. The deeper question, the one that actually tells you something true about this family, is why. Why did Charles do this now? What is a 77-year-old king, who is still in cancer treatment, trying to say with a gesture this significant? And why is it so complicated for his son to simply say yes? That's what we're going to work through today. Because this isn't a tabloid story. It's not gossip. It's something much more human than that, and much more painful. And if you've been following this family for any amount of time, I think you already sense that. I think that's exactly why you're here. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. And honestly, you picked a good week to show up. And if you've been here for a while, you already know that we don't do the breathless headline version of these stories. We slow it down. We look at what's actually underneath. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Charles. Here is something that I think gets lost in the noise of all this. Charles has cancer. He has had it since early 2024. He announced it himself, which, for a British monarch, is already almost unprecedented. Kings don't do that. Kings don't go on television and talk about their diagnosis and urge people to get screened early. That's not in the institutional playbook. That was a human decision. That was Charles the man, not Charles the crown. And in December of last year, he gave an update. His treatment is being reduced. He has, in the careful language that palaces use, responded exceptionally well. He is not described as cured. He is not in remission, at least not officially. But the frequency of his treatment sessions is being dialed back. The doctors are moving into what they're calling a precautionary phase. Now, you can read that as good news, and in some ways it clearly is. But you can also read it as the kind of update that makes a 77-year-old man look around at his life and ask himself a very direct question. How much time do I have left with the people I love? Because Charles has grandchildren he has barely met. Archie is 7 years old. Lilibet is 5. They left this country when they were too small to remember it. They have grown up in California, with California summers and California schools, and a California version of who their family is. And their grandfather, the King of England, has seen them in person a handful of times. Think about that. Really sit with it for a second. There is a grandfather in a palace in London who has a 7-year-old grandson and a 5-year-old granddaughter who probably don't fully understand what their grandfather actually is. They know he's important, they know he's far away, but the weight of it, the reality of it, they'll understand that later. And by the time they understand it, Charles may not be here to see their faces when it lands. That is what's behind this offer. I am as certain of that as I am of anything in this story. This isn't about optics. A king who wanted good press could have found 100 easier ways to generate it. This isn't about protocol, or politics, or managing the narrative around the monarchy. Those things exist, of course, they always exist. but they are not what is driving a 77-year-old man who is still attending cancer centers to open the doors of his private residence to a son who published a book describing the royal family in terms that were, at times, genuinely devastating. This is a father who is running the math on his own life and deciding that the cost of the estrangement is now higher than the cost of the discomfort. And here is the thing about a gesture like this, the thing that makes it so significant and so heartbreaking at the same time. It can't be undone. Charles has now made the first move, officially, publicly, in a way that is documented and reported and real. If Harry says no, that's the story. If Harry says yes, that's a different story. But either way, Charles has done something that cannot be walked back. He has said, in the clearest possible language short of actual words, "I want my son in my home. I want my grandchildren near me. Whatever happened between us, I am choosing, right now, to put it down." That is not a political gesture. That is fatherhood. And the reason it hits so hard, the reason people all over the world are watching this with something that feels almost like grief, is that most of us have felt some version of this. A family split by something that started small and became enormous. A silence that lasted longer than anyone intended. A moment where someone finally reached out and the other person didn't know how to respond, or wasn't ready, or was held back by something the first person couldn't fully see. That's what this is. And if you've lived any version of that story, you already understand exactly what Charles is feeling right now. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further, because this is the part that most coverage completely skips over. Harry hasn't said no, but he also hasn't said yes, and the reasons why are far more complicated than people are giving them credit for. Because accepting this offer isn't just about Harry and his father, it's about walking into a house that belongs, in some very real sense, to someone else entirely. And that someone else? He is not happy about any of this. Let me ask you something. Imagine you had a difficult, painful falling out with a member of your family. Not a small disagreement, something real, something that required you to leave, to put thousands of miles between yourself and the place you grew up, to build an entirely new life from scratch because the old one had become genuinely untenable. Imagine you had written about it, publicly, in a book that millions of people read. And then imagine your father called and said, "Come stay with us." On the surface, that sounds like healing. That sounds like the beginning of something better. And maybe it is. But, "come stay with us," when us includes the person at the center of the conflict, when our home is the place where the wounds were made, that's not a simple yes or no. That's one of the hardest decisions a person can be asked to make. For Harry and Meghan, accepting this offer means returning to royal territory in a way they haven't done since everything broke open. It means Meghan, specifically, walking back into an environment that she has described, on record, under oath essentially, in the pages of Spare, as a place where she did not feel safe, where she felt surveilled, where her mental health deteriorated to a point that she has been open about publicly. That is not ancient history. That is recent, documented, real. And that's before you even get to William, because here is the geography of this situation. Royal residences are not hotels with separate wings and checkout times. They are family homes, in the truest sense, layered, interconnected, politically charged. And William, as the Prince of Wales, as the heir, as the person who will one day own all of this literally and figuratively, his presence, his attitude, his energy, is woven into these spaces whether he's physically there or not. We now know, from reporting this week, that William is not just uncomfortable with Harry and Meghan's visit, he is furious. One source described him as threatening to boycott Sandringham entirely if Harry and Meghan are welcomed onto the grounds. His team has made clear that William and Kate have, quote, no intention of meeting with Harry and Meghan outside of a possible official public engagement. That's not a door left ajar, that is a door bolted from the inside. So now picture this from Harry's perspective. His father is saying, "Come home." And his brother, who controls enormous amounts of the social and political atmosphere within that home, is saying, implicitly but unmistakably, "Don't you dare." Harry is standing between two men. One of them is his father, who is ill and aging and opening his arms. The other is his brother, who is furious and powerful and drawing a line. And behind Harry, there is Meghan, who has every reason in the world to be cautious about walking back into that orbit, and who has been notably, strikingly, pointedly silent on the entire question of where they will stay. That silence, by the way, is doing a lot of work right now, because when Meghan has something to say, she says it. We have seen that. We know that. And the fact that she hasn't said anything about the accommodation offer, hasn't addressed it, hasn't given any indication of her position, that is itself a position. It says, this is complicated enough that I'm not going to touch it publicly. And when something is complicated enough that Meghan Markle won't touch it publicly, you know it is genuinely, seriously complicated. Now, there's another layer here that I want to make sure we don't skip, because it changes the entire equation in a way that most people aren't talking about. And it has to do not with Harry and Meghan at all, but with two little kids who are about to land in a country they've never really known. Stay with me, because this is where it gets to the part that I think will actually determine how this ends. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, because the next two parts of this story are where it gets genuinely complicated and genuinely worth paying attention to. We need to talk about William. Not the version of William that gets presented in the official narrative, the steady, responsible heir, the man who shows up, who does the work, who never complains and never explains. That version is real, to a degree, but it is not the complete picture. And right now, in this specific situation, it is almost irrelevant, because Charles didn't ask him. That is the detail that keeps surfacing in reporting this week, and I don't think it's getting nearly enough attention. When Charles made the decision to extend this offer to Harry and Meghan, to formally invite his younger son and his family to stay in a royal residence during their July visit, he did not coordinate with his heir. He did not loop William in. He did not seek consensus. He acted as a father, not as the head of a family institution that operates by committee. And William found out the way the rest of us did. Now, if you are someone who believes in the tidy narrative, the one where Team Charles and Team William are fundamentally aligned, where the right side of the family is unified and coherent, and only Harry and Meghan create chaos, this week should have permanently complicated that story for you. Because what we are watching right now is not a split between Harry and the palace. It is a split within the palace itself. Charles is tired. I think that is the most honest way to say it. He is a father in his late 70s who is managing a cancer diagnosis, running an ancient institution, and watching two of his children conduct a Cold War that he has become a casualty of. He has played the diplomat. He has held the line. He has tried to thread the needle between his elder son's fury and his younger son's grief. And at some point, possibly around the time the doctors started talking about reducing treatment in language that is careful enough to be genuinely worrying, he decided he was done threading needles. He wants to see his grandchildren. He wants his son in his home. And if that makes William uncomfortable, Charles has, with this gesture, quietly communicated that William's comfort is no longer the organizing principle of every decision he makes. That is significant. That is, in the language of royal family dynamics, almost seismic, because William has operated for years with an implicit understanding that his position, his feelings, his boundaries, his very particular set of grievances about Harry and Meghan would be respected by the institution, that the palace would hold together around him, that nobody on the inside would move toward Harry without William's tacit approval. Charles just moved, without approval, and now William has reportedly issued what sources are calling an ultimatum. He is, according to reporting, prepared to distance himself from Sandringham events if Harry and Meghan are welcome there. He is making it known that he views this as a provocation, that his wife and children will not be placed in proximity to Harry and Meghan in any casual, unplanned way. Which brings us to one of the most quietly devastating elements of this entire situation. Because in that house, in that royal residence, there are children on both sides of this war. And none of them chose any of it. George is 12 years old. Charlotte is 11. Louis is 8. Archie is 7. Lilibet is 5. These 5 children are first cousins. They share a grandmother who is gone now, a grandfather who is ill, and a family legacy that will follow them for the rest of their lives, regardless of what their parents decide to do with it. They are connected by blood and by history, and by a weight that none of them are old enough to fully understand yet. And the two youngest ones are about to land in a country they have no real memory of, surrounded by a family they have met only in photographs, and brief, supervised moments that their parents managed very carefully from opposite sides of an invisible wall. Charles wants them to meet. That much is clear from everything we know about his motivations here. A grandfather offering his home is a grandfather trying to close a distance, not just between himself and Harry, but between those 5 children who are growing up as strangers when they don't have to be. William, from everything that has been reported, has no such intention. His team has been explicit. There will be no casual meeting, no spontaneous cousins in the garden moment, no scenario where Kate and Meghan have to navigate a shared afternoon with 5 children between them and years of silence behind them. And Meghan is silent. That silence has a specific weight when we talk about the children, because Meghan has been consistent about one thing throughout all of this. She is protective. She has said publicly that one of the reasons they left was to give their children a life that wasn't defined by the institution, by the cameras, by the pressure. Bringing Archie and Lilibet into a royal residence, even for a week, even under the warmest possible conditions, is bringing them into the things she left to protect them from. That is not a small thing to ask of a mother. But here is the other side of that. Those children are also being kept from a grandfather who might not have unlimited time. They are growing up without cousins who live 40 minutes away. They are being raised in the absence of a family that exists, that is real, that could be part of their lives if the adults around them could find a way through. And at some point, not now probably, but eventually, Archie and Lilibet will be old enough to ask their own questions about all of this. They will want to understand why they didn't know their grandfather better, why they never played with George and Charlotte and Louis, why the family they see on the news is a family they were never really inside of. Those questions don't have good answers, and the window to make different choices, to build different memories, gets smaller every year. July 6th is the date that keeps appearing in reporting as a kind of informal deadline. The visit is set for July. The Invictus Games bring Harry back with a purpose, with a public reason to be here that doesn't require anyone to manufacture an occasion. And the accommodation question, palace or hotel, royal residence or careful distance, will almost certainly be resolved before then. If Harry accepts, we will watch, in real time, what it looks like when an estranged son walks back into his father's house. Not as a political gesture, not as a PR move. As a son, with his wife and his children, crossing a threshold that has been closed for years. And then, after the visit, they will fly back to California. The children will go back to their schools. The distance will reassert itself, the way it always does, the way geography makes inevitable. And we will be left asking the same question we've been asking for 5 years now. Is this the beginning of something real? Or is it a brief thaw before the freeze comes back? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anyone does, including the people living it. But here's what I do know. A 77-year-old man who is still going to cancer centers opened the door to his home and told his son, "You are welcome here. Whatever happened, whatever was written, whatever was said, you are welcome here." That is not nothing. In a family this complicated, in a dynamic this layered and painful and public, that is actually everything. The question is whether his son will walk through the door before it's too late to matter. If this story means something to you, if you've ever been on either side of a family silence that went on too long, leave a comment below. I read them. And I think this week, more than most, this one is worth talking about. I'll see you in the next one.